welcome back to the Faith and Culture Show. I'm Catherine Camp, your hostess for the show. And today we are digging further into the topic of our education in the United States of America. And we're going to do this, and we do all the shows, because I want you to have that knowledge so you can have those difficult conversations with the people around you, conversations that count, conversations with an eternal perspective. And I have Ann Tydus back with us. She is, she knows so much about how things went sideways and how early on they went sideways in our educational system. This is part 2 of the corruption of our education in the United States. And she has a lot to show us today. So I want to just go ahead and dive right in. Welcome back. And you are so busy. I just feel honored that you're here, and it's going to be so good because we need to be educated on this.
This is the number one area, especially now with the new administration. Everybody's talking education. And I hate to be, everybody's cloud in their day, but I cannot emphasize enough that you can't fix this. It's like we talked about last show, is that it's thriving. It's not failing. I call it the fool's errand, and I've written a Substack on it, is that they have us on a fool's errand, which is we're going in circles. There's no amount of anti-DEI, anti-CRT, there's no detransing the bathroom. There's no amount of legislation in a country that literally needs no more laws. They just need to follow what the country was founded on. There's no way to fix this. And that's both parties, is that it has to be dismantled. You have to remove your children before it's dismantled. Number one, don't wait. But you keep fighting after that happens. And the reason is because, as I'm going to show here, is that it's doing exactly what it was created to do. Oh. And that goes back, most people have heard of Horace Mann, and at least the Prussian model, which is the factory model. Get them all in to a captured environment, line them up. And they don't even feed them actual education anymore, but that's how it started. But there's about 70 years prior to that. That's extremely important to understand, that it didn't get adopted. It had a very specific purpose.
And when you get to Horace Mann, not everybody, I know in what you've been studying, the people you're around, they know what that means, but not everybody knows.
That's
so
just,
when you get to that,
even if you don't know much, those are kind of the two things: Horace Mann and the Prussian model. I would say, if that's it, most people, like some people, that if they have a little bit of understanding that government schooling is bad, or that that's where their understanding usually starts from. And it's frustrating almost, because that's where the majority of education, I say historians, but I'm a historian, an actual historian. I just never thought it would manifest itself into American education historian, but that's where it is, that it's actually it's much further. And you have to understand that so you can understand what's going on today. Because if not, we're just going to keep going in circles on that fool's errand, trying to reform something that can't be reformed.
Wow. I forgot you said that last time, that, it's doing exactly
it's not
what it
failing.
was designed to do.
And that's what, when I say that, people go, it's like a light bulb, is that it's thriving. It's divided us by our color. It's sexualized our children, which we're going to get to the next show about my master's in geopolitical war history, and how many totalitarian dictators across the world in the last 100 years have divided families by hypersexualizing children, making them, gender fluid, or being, asexual. It's not new. Nothing about this is new. Yeah. And it brings up the question I kept asking myself: what's wrong with us? One is our privilege. The only privilege we have in this country is we were born free. And that's as a baby nation, which is what we are, we were born free. You can have conversations. I have them all the time with people Cubans, Venezuelans, people from Russia, that they've lived it. And it's, I've had the honor of knowing G. Van Fleet, but she's not the only one. Is that you can talk to people who have fled Poland, and it is that they know exactly what they're seeing. We were born free. We're naive to think that it can happen here. And that's really, it's like, you have to be able to see and have your eyes open enough that when God has been removed, that is why the nation is in pain right now. Like, excuse me, our children are not mentally ill. They are suffering from nihilism.
Yeah.
There's nothing greater than the here and now for them. Why would you be respectful to your teacher, respectful to each other? Why are these fights happening? Why? It is because these children are being taught something completely separate outside of their home than what's going on in their home, which creates a chaos in their minds.
Yes.
They are constantly in chaos because what's being taught at home, and then your parents are telling you, respect your teachers, listen to what your don't get in trouble at school. It's like, when you step back and you can look at what a child is going through 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because most parents don't know any better than to be like, challenge your teacher. Don't do what your teacher said. Is that tiny human being, what's going on in the chaos, the storm in their brains and in their souls. You're taking them to church on Sunday. You're telling them to have a biblical, God-centered worldview. But at school, the closest they'll ever get to anything resembling that could be love thy neighbor, but it's not in a biblical worldview. That's the problem with a lot of churches too, is that they just preach the love thy neighbor, and that's how they got usurped. They're not actually teaching the Bible. They're not teaching,
the gospel the right way at all. It's perverted.
And a lot of understanding about this, about what happened with the churches, is the churches that have adopted this collectivist worldview, and the churches that have veered far left are the ones that simply think the Bible just, love thy neighbor. Well, no, that's not exactly how it works.
They're also the churches. They are the same churches that have their titles on these private independent schools that are supposedly Christian. They are the left-leaning churches. And so when they go to chapel, they're learning the same thing that they're teaching them at school, but it has nothing to do with the Bible for real.
I'm wondering, am I frozen?
Yes, you're frozen. There you go.
That's really, okay. Wow. It was really weird. I was like, see, there's, okay. But yeah, is that I tell people, and I'm like, please, when I hear people saying, especially now, they're popping up, private schools are popping up all over. And I'm telling you, do not leave a private school that is doing great things for your child. Your child is thriving for a couple $1,000 a month. Do not take your child out. If you have found a good private school that has not been compromised, meaning they're only taking the tuition you're paying, they're not taking any state or federal funds. They're not using the SOLs. They're not doing anything related, because that's about 10% that are not compromised. Is that do not remove your child for $1,000 a month or $500 a month, because they're going to have just like any opening store. Think of it, they're going to have a great opening price. And in a year, you've removed your child from their friends. You've put them in a new situation, a new environment, because of some dollars. And because it's all going to be rosy when they first open, but then in a year or two, the tuition's going to go up. And I'm always asking people, can I vet this private for you? And it's very easy to do when you know where to look. But is that there's more important things than a couple dollars. And in the end, what's going to end up happening is the good ones. I say good ones, meaning they're not compromised. They're still private. A private school is only a private school if they have never taken a single state or federal dollars. Once they do that, they are not private anymore. You're paying $15,000, $20,000 a year to send your child to what you think is going to be different just because it's a little less radical, but they're not teaching a biblical worldview truly, because if they're using any kind of government, state or federal, it is secular 100%. And that is going to veer your child maybe a little slower off the God-centered path. But is that you're paying now for what, and you're still paying taxes to a child destroying government education. And understanding education, it is a hard pill to swallow because Americans want an easy answer. There is no easy answer. There's nothing that Trump can do. There's no legislation. There's no parental rights, anything that you can do to fix this. The only answer is that you get them out. And then once you get them out, we unite and essentially return to what I think of as like Little House on the Prairie days, which is how it always should have been, which is the one-room schoolhouse. And that requires a parental mind shift because women have been taught not to have the biblical order. Women, it goes back to women being the whole equality movement in the 60s. Women must be equal. They must have the same payment and jobs as men. That women and men can never be equal. Women have this amazing skill set. We're mothers, we're nurturers, we do amazing things. Men, and you have to be able to say this to people. I'm a stay-at-home mother. My husband is the provider. But what I provide in my home is something my husband could never provide. Not only that is that I am the lioness that protects my cubs. But if we're both in the workforce and our children are in government schools, you're automatically going to say to yourself, well, I can't take my kids out. I can't afford to do that. Yes, you can. You can. But you have to change your mindset that you as a woman are supposed to be in a job. If it works out, if you have a job you love, your family is safe and protected, and you can work at the same time, God bless, go do it. But you let go of the idea that you as a woman are not fulfilled if you are not also providing for your family in a monetary way. Because what you're not providing is that biblical order. Your children are suffering because the monetary has taken over for what they need in the biblical order with you at home. Does that make sense?
Of course it makes sense. Unfortunately, you're right. We have been conditioned since the 70s to think that women have to do everything. And we can do, it needs balance. Everything is balance. And
I don't want to make mothers who I was a single mother once. Like, I get it. Like, you have to, but your children always have to come first. Is that if you're a superhero and you can juggle it all and you have that perfect job where you only work 9 to 2 and your life is fully balanced and your children are safe and they're not, is that awesome. But at the end of the day, what we had to do, and I'm sure, is that I don't tell anybody that anything that I have not done myself. Is that 3 years ago when my daughter came home in 6th grade, broken, a shell of a child. No 11-year-old should ever be that dark. Talking about she had generalized anxiety disorder, needed to see a therapist. She was talking to gender fluid kids in her computer. She was being asked what opiates were in her house with pictures of how to use them, how to find them. Is that my husband came home from overseas? Yes. So children committing suicide, children dying of overdoses, people are not looking to the right answers. It's going to be easy to say it's the parents' fault. Is that you have no idea what your children are being taught. That kindergartners are being given a suicide hotline badge. That was Virginia bipartisan unanimous legislation 2 years ago. Kindergartners having all access to adults on the back of bathroom stalls and on cards because there's a mental health problem you want to give 5-year-olds. Is that people are not thinking, is that they are not stopping to say, hold up. They are completely reliant on the government and not the church. The institution of the church has been replaced by the government.
Yes.
I tell people it's God over government, not God over the Democrats. It's God over government. Is that I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, is that what the intrusion into our lives is that it is God over government, not a political party.
And that's a whole other thing, is getting people to focus back on the Lord. But that is going to take a while, because the churches have it's their own fault. It's
But
their
I
own
tell
fault.
you, it's like,
they have been weak.
Absolutely. I've been clean 16 years, and I have been at that place that these children are at, where there is no God. You have nothing but the here and now. And through my recovery, and it's like when I'm having the hardest day, this fight has gotten to me. My children it's like, I can feel God, like, and that beauty is what unites us. Like, I have the most beautiful conversations with people who everybody in the media says we should hate each other, but we people that still cling to God and his word, and that there is a better life. It's like, it's beautiful, and it saves. I mean, you can watch prison videos of different singers in prisons yesterday, singing to these men doing life, but they have faith and they have God, and they're okay with, and it's like, we have to go back to that. It is the only way to save our souls.
And understanding our education department and just the way education is done here is a step toward that.
Yeah.
Getting back to that. And I know that you want it. We're going to start before this thing, Horseman.
Yeah.
And so you tell us how far back you're going. And
so if you want to bring it up, I'm just going to cover real quick kind of where we went with the chronology last week. Yeah. So I think you need to.
Okay, up to me. Let's see.
So last week we talked about, I work out of with the amazing Don Blake and Judeo-Christian Alliance, which we are launching a new website that's going to have a whole education portion on it. And the chronology of American education, which he asked me to do at the Appeal to Heaven for the 1607 project, the first landing project in May of last year. Mm-hmm. And so I had to, from biblical principles at the landing in 1607 to New Age humanism, which is where we are now. And we talked about to the mid 1800s is that we were almost at 100% literacy with no government schooling. We had the McGuffey readers, which is how you actually teach phonics, not a creation of science of reading. And so today I'm going to just give you some statistics. So then, before forced compulsory education and government education illiteracy, it's run together. Before forced compulsory education and government education, illiteracy was 4.7%, meaning 95% of Americans were literate, not partially literate. In 1933, before forced integration in the civil rights movement, and we'll get there next show, urban Blacks were 90% literate before forced integration into government schooling, where they would all be in a captured environment. Now, 44 million adults are now unable to read a simple story to their children. 50% of adults cannot read a book at an 8th grade level. 45 million are functionally illiterate and read below a 5th grade level. 3 out of 4 people on welfare can't read. 20% of Americans read below the level needed to earn a living wage. 50% of unemployed between the ages of 16 and 21 cannot read well enough to be considered functionally literate. Wow. Between 46 and 51% of American adults have an income well below the poverty level because of their inability to read. So it's 1 + 1 = 2. So what happened? And then this postcard, I love it because it's from the 1900 World Fair in Paris. And these are not science fiction people who all of a sudden made up these images of machines sucking on our children's brains. All of this, it goes back. It has an origin. When I started...
Wait, what was that? Anne, what was that? Was that just like a meme back then? Was that actually happening?
So at the 19... No, they knew. It's like... I'm frozen again. It's like Orwell in 1984. It's like all these books, The Giver. It's like they know what we don't know. They knew, because Aldous and Julius, the Huxleys, one founded, the UN, and one wrote 1984. No, that's Orwell's. But Brave New World. So while one brother's writing a Brave New World, one is creating the New World Order. So it's kind of like they knew there's all these wonderful people. So do you think that they had a crystal ball? And machine learning goes back.
No, they could see. They knew the people behind it all.
Yes, and so it's from the World Fair in Paris in 1900.
Wow.
So while I as a researcher, I was I'm researching socialism in America, and I come across this first one here, History of Socialism in the United States. Now, the copy date or the print date was on the other side. So I put it in 1903. And it's a 400-page book from 1903.
Wow.
On the history of of socialism in the United States. That led me to History of American Socialisms. This one was from 1870.
That just blows my mind.
And they're both 400-page books. Now, what they do is so we think of socialism as like like Lenin, bullshit. That is that before it had a name, you think of like toward, the collective utopia, I guess would be the proper way to think of the origin of socialism before it had a name. That's why this one here and from 1870 has socialisms. So they're talking about all of the utopian communities where, like, because socialism is nobody owns anything. The collective good is what the community is all about. And so that's what they're writing about in these books.
Which is interesting because you look at the United Nations, if you go to their website or the WEF, that's all you see.
That's all you learn about in school now.
Yeah, the greater good. It's for the community.
Yeah.
It's for you don't own anything. The WEF, of course, the 2030 they were really boasting that you won't own anything, and you'll never be happier.
They don't want to buy houses. They just want to live in rented apartments. Around where I live in Virginia, these rental condos are sprouting. There's no new homes really being built. Is that they want us to rent and own nothing. Like, lease a car, don't buy it.
In Arizona, there's a part in Arizona, I heard Buckeye, where they're not allowing them to build single family homes.
Yeah. That's anymore. What they're doing is
they're trying to break through that wall, but once you let them have a foothold, these people, it's really hard to get back that freedom, that land.
And that's why where I tell people is we've fallen over the cliff. We're hanging on by a fingernail. And it's like, and I say that because if you look at, so I did my master's thesis on appeasement and how appeasement across Europe led to 11 million people in the Holocaust being dead by people thinking that, which is what we do every day, whether it's critical race theory or transgender or any of that, is that you give them, like the Republican Party is really bad at it right now. Well, we're going to give them a little bit. Maybe that'll satiate them. No, it is a black hole. If you feed a black hole enough, the black hole will get so big, it will swallow you. You cannot make these people happy. They will not be happy until the end goal, the final solution is done. And so doing my master's thesis, even though that was 20 some years ago, it's how I know that God put me in this fight with the understanding that if Europe had fought back instead of appeasing Hitler, like, is that it probably, but it would have taken enough people having enough courage to stand up and say no, which is exactly what we have to do now.
Yeah. And that means a whole change of mindset.
It does. You have to completely look at your world, like, and accept that, one, it is that bad, and two, that you have to change your own mindset and be committed to accepting that what you've thought or known your entire life is not the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm waiting to pick, so those books, in them, they both mentioned this community called New Harmony in Indiana. And Robert Owen and his son, Robert Dale Owen. Robert Owen was from Wales. And you can look him up. He's literally known as the father of socialism. He moved here after New Lanark, which was his Welsh utopian community, failed, moved to Indiana and created New Harmony. He was going to have this collective, utopian little society in Indiana. And it ended up failing again. This is you can order this book off of Amazon, Utopianism and Education. So Robert Owen and the Owenites is where what he said was he kept failing because he didn't get them young enough. Because when you start to, even if your parents bring you into a utopian community, if you have not been from the beginning of life exposed to this collective, everybody's well-being is more important than your own, it will never succeed. So if you stop for a minute and think about that, and then you think about how do you get all children to adopt this mentality across the nation for this utopian we're going to have, because they don't care if they're dead when everything comes to fruition. That's the left is so united on this. There's no infighting. They're so united. They don't care if they're dead as long as the destruction of this country comes to fruition. So he said, and so the entire idea of getting children into one captive environment for his utopian community is how government schooling came about. He said, to train and educate the rising generation will at all times be the first object of society to which every other will be subordinate. To preserve this is important for later, to preserve permanent good health, the state of mind must be taken into consideration. Another interesting, the two kind of go hand in hand. This is Orestes Brownson. He was a elitist. He had a lot of money. Robert Owen went to Orestes and wanted to create this utopian socialism, to which he funded a lot of this. And the reason I have a picture is he ended up converting. Like, there's a lot of communists. Bella Dodd is that there's a lot of memoirs out there of people who were American communists that will tell you exactly what was going on in this country in the 50s with McCarthy. But he's one of those, the earliest ones, is that he ended up converting into, I believe he was a Catholic, he became a priest, a minister, a priest. Okay. And so kind of like C.S. Lewis and even like Jordan Peterson, all these people that have gone from one to the other. But in this, an oration on liberal studies at Mount St. Mary's College in Maryland, this is where you find the documentation about everything that Robert Owen was doing and the intention behind what he was doing in government education.
And what, I can't see it very well. Is it Phil N?
Owen Brownson or Orestes but if you were to look up like Robert Owen and Brown, like you'll see a lot of stuff, but I go to the original sources and read what they actually wrote. I don't read what other people tell me they wrote.
Well, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Right. But so he said about Robert Owen, he said the great object was to get rid of Christianity and convert our churches into halls of science. The plan was not to make open attacks on religion, although we might the clergy and bring them into contempt where we could, but to establish a system of state, but we said national schools, from which all religion was to be excluded. And this is, I believe, in like 1832.
1832? Wow.
Because so he's talking about right here, that's a quote from his big, he gave a big speech, and into which when he first got involved with Robert Owen, to what their plan was. They've said forever is that we have watched, that's why my generation is completely indoctrinated into thinking that everything going on with our children is something, it's been such a slow progression, because that's where the whole Marxism and communism comes in, is that, Lenin and Stalin, and we're going to talk about Gramsci and them, next show, is that they knew that a radical revolution could never be done. They would not accomplish their end game with that. It had to be a slow progression, not a radical revolution. And so what we've been watching has been the slow progression. We're just at the end. It did not come about because of COVID. It did not emerge. If you look at from political correctness in my lifetime, born in 80, political correctness, like, is that kind of, that's where, but if you go back before that, we'll talk about the long march through the institutions and how they all became compromised, not just teachers, colleges. They meant like law schools. The lawyers are compromised. The doctors are compromised. Everybody, every institution where people are going to get higher education to then do what? Educate more people. They're all compromised. And we're just at the end game with not enough people fully prepared to open their eyes. So we talked about the Prussian model, but in the Prussian model of education, which is often called, that's what our children are in now. So when they talk about the Prussian model, it's lock them down 8 hours a day in a environment where they're in, a captured environment, and then you feed them what the state tells you that you need to be taught. That's the Prussian model of education in a nutshell. Interesting.
Okay, let me just quickly stop you there on the previous book that you just were quoting from. He was quoting from Robert Owen.
Yes. So Orestes Brownson and Robert Owen. Orestes Brownson essentially funded, because he had all the money. He was an elite entrepreneur in early America. So Robert Owen came over from England, and he wanted to create this utopian community. He approached Orestes Brownson, and he funded it. And Orestes ended up having this enlightened, like, God, Jesus, like, he realized how wrong this was. And much like Jordan Peterson, who used to be an atheist, or C.S. Lewis, or any of these people, is that these were big thinkers. There's a lot is that they had I believe the humility, to be like, there's something about this that feels innately wrong. And they started seeking the knowledge, and they turned to God. And that's what he did. And so in this book here, from June 1853, he made a big speech for the Philomathian Society, to which he outed what Robert Owen their intention was with these utopian communities.
Okay.
And then the Prussian model, which everybody blames for government education in America, gets blamed on Horace Mann, That's Horus right here.
And what you were saying earlier, I'm sorry about the Prussian model.
Prussian.
Yeah, and how they have our children captive. And when my daughters were going to school, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Wow. It's mandated. They have them 5 days out of the week from 8 a.m. to basically 4 p.m. if they're in a sport.
But now it's birth, thrive to 5 is what our current Virginia administration has going. So literally, Lenin, as soon as they can be away from their mother, they belong to the state. They've created.
And then I started thinking, then I started learning about the brain formation and how those early years between birth and 5 are incredibly formative years. And I started to notice they're trying to make it that your child has to go to school now mandatory at 3 years old.
Yes.
And I was thinking,
what about kindergarten? We talk about they need to be kindergarten ready, kindergarten readiness. Yeah. And like all a kindergartner needs to be able to do is not pee in their pants.
Yeah.
Or cry the entire 8 hours they're away from their mother, like playing with blocks. But that's not what kindergarten. They're sitting in front of computers all day. They get 15 minutes of recess a day per 8 hours. They're getting punished collectively with no recess for a week. This is every public school, is that then they have to have silent lunch collectively if they don't. 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds with 15 minutes of playtime. That is like child abuse. I can't.
Yeah,
it's like I can't imagine. And then you want them to. Then when they act crazy, oh my God! Now they need to be they need to be on medication now. People aren't thinking what's going on in these. Okay, all of a sudden, my kid who went into government schooling, she had taught herself how to talk. Right? Babies are pretty amazing. Like they teach themselves. We don't teach them to talk.
Right.
She taught herself how to talk, but now all of a sudden she gets into government schooling and she's got all these disorders and she's got oppositional defiant. Is that people are, it's such a, once you grasp a hold of it, it's such an easy leap. Wow. But you have to be willing to see that it's not that complicated.
Okay. Thank you.
So this Horus man was the original, or what most people that, even if you just know a little bit, the Prussian model and Horus man, it's like HORACE man. He's what most people refer to. He was the superintendent of state instruction. I believe it was Massachusetts. So he developed. And that all the other states and all other government schooling came from Horace Mann in Prussia. This is just a side note, but so Victor Cousin was French, and he was sent off to. This is just to show you what I do to understand all this. He was sent in 1836 to Prussia, and so this was his report on Prussian education. And I'm happy to send all this to you if you want to put somewhere for other people to have access to it. That so his report, which was written in 1836, eventually, slowly, of course, got translated and made it back to America. And that's what most people, they don't know that portion, but that's how Horace Mann got the idea. But really is that Robert Owen, and if you read his biography, he talks about his conversations with Prussia and the Prussian king. Remember, Prussia is essentially Germany.
Okay.
You have to essentially Prussia, Germany. So we have a German model of education. He essentially sold his idea to get rid of Christianity. You have to put them all in one environment. And that's in his biography. You can read that. So we created what now the entire rest of the globe had never had before. It's like we had 4,000 years, essentially, 2000 BC we had written word. We weren't using hieroglyphs or cave carvings anymore. Is how many Plato, like Aristotle, how many amazing people like Shakespeare had no government schooling. And that's really what you have to start wrapping your head around is government schooling is a blip on the radar. And if you look at everything that this globe has accomplished before government schooling, it's not hard to make the leap that what has to be done. So Johann Fichte wrote The General Nature of the New Education around the same time that the Prussian model was being adopted in America. And he said, education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils are thus schooled, see, they say schooled, which is important, not educated, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking and acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need
for
army
subjects. Yeah.
Yes, subject. And when you think about it, for more than one generation, is that this has been a slow progression through generations. And so for anybody, I would say less than 50, because I just turned 45, is that everybody the jump to, well, I turned out okay, is it what everybody does. It can't be this bad because I turned out okay. I'm a Republican and I went through government schooling. I hear this over and over and over. Everybody automatically puts themselves at the center. Well, I'm okay. I was too, but then I look back at a 1956 8th grade Constitution exam that's 101 questions. And I go, because I had to teach myself how a constitutional republic works for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And so essentially, how do you destroy a nation? You get them in a captured environment. You take God out of schools. Because what happens when you take God out? You create moral confusion and chaos. The children are taught that morals are relative versus real. And no one can say with authority what is right and what is wrong. And since there are no real consequences to bad behavior in schools, obedience to authority goes out the window. You have your social justice seekers ready at whim. Teachers become objects of scorn and disrespect as well as parents. Other students are either friends or enemies. You can either incite a student to commit suicide by unrelenting ridicule. You live by the law of the school jungle, and parents have no idea how to deal with the moral lawlessness in schools. Is that what's going on in the schools right now is that they want to blame parent. Every parent did not get on a phone tree 20 years ago and decide to be bad parents. That makes no sense. Mm-hmm. Where are you required legally to send them into a captured environment? How do you get an entire generation to turn out the same? It's not the parents. And of course, they had to make us illiterate by dumbing us down. This is from, and we'll get to the NEA, because they got their charter in 1857. The NEA. Just to keep that like.
Now that stands for National Education Association. Yes. Okay.
The National Education Association is, I have documents of, this is from one of the Denver, this was in one of their, from 1924. I have all of these microfiched, and they're called the Progressive Educators, but it's the National Education Association. Most people think of Randy Weingarten and the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. So Randy Weingarten is the New York teacher, but the NEA, so the National Education Association. Virginia we are a right to work state, so collective bargaining it's not for teachers. So whatever division you live in has probably an EA. Now, whether they have actual collective bargaining, meaning they're a union, or a Mean Girls Club, as I call them, because they don't have collective bargaining. But the power that they have in this county, when there's only 15% of teachers that are actual members, teachers tell me all the time is they don't speak for me. Yes, they do, because they're the only ones and they speak loud. And the stuff that if you're not willing to fight them on is so nonsensical that it is so radical but that's who they are. The radical teachers they are a member of a union. And one of them is probably the NEA, because I think Fairfax, there's a couple of AFT, American Federation of Teachers, but the two essentially merged like 10 years ago. So this is from the NEA in 1924. Pupils read words as units in method used in city schools. The old style of chanting aloud dropped, and aim is to train youngsters in rapid and silent recognition. Then here, reading. This is in 1924. Then and now. This has everything. Today, the psychologist tells us, is 100 years ago. Today, the psychologist tells us that reading is putting into the printed page, not getting thought from it. Hence, people are engaged in research to discover what are the basic experiences which a child needs to have before attempting the reading process. When he does attempt it, what selections shall he read? While as yet we do not have hard and fast answers to these questions, we at least no longer require elementary pupils to read such poems as this taken from Miscellaneous Moral and Instructive in Prose and Verse, collected from various authors. And then it had a poem like next to it, for the use of schools and improvement of young persons of both sexes. So it's like, psychologist tells us reading is not getting thought from a book. Reading is putting thought into the printed page. And they're going to do research based on experiences, which a child must have experiences before. And this, we'll talk about how education psychology is, that they broke it down in a nutshell right here, is that psychologists were telling them that, and they don't have any hard or fast, they still don't have hard and fast answers, essentially, but is that reading is not reading a book, like getting ideas, creativity, imagination, literacy. Reading is not getting something out of a book. It's putting your experience into it. But that, essentially it's a great place, because from there that's when John Dewey, and he's another name so what we are living, progressive education is essential. That is what we are living in. Mm-hmm. Every element is progressive education in our government schools. Right now, you've got Pavlov in our, when I say this, I mean, they're things they developed. Pavlov, Skinner, these are all behaviorists, keep in mind. And what does a behaviorist do? They work with animals. And we'll talk about that next show, about how they took their, like Pavlov's dogs, Skinner's the pigeons, like training them. Pavlov, Skinner, these are different practices, or it's all experimental, which is what the nutshell of the long and short of it is that they have been experimenting on our children for 70 years now. I was experimenting.
Us, we've been experimented on.
None of this is like, it's like, I think of, again, my master's degree, I'm like, the Holocaust, Nuremberg, because I can show you where in the Virginia Code in 2015, they went in without the General Assembly, and they completely redlined the code on human experimentation to allow this to be done on children without their parental consent. So when people said, oh, you have to talk about I will show you. It's right here. And they did it at the federal level too. They knew it was experimentation. All of it is pseudoscience, because psychology, it is all pseudoscience anyway. And that's what when people think that the kids need mental health counseling done not by counselors, by teachers, is I'm saying it's a pseudoscience to begin with. You can't go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. They're not going to run a blood test or a brain scan. They're guessing you have bipolar, schizoaffective, or depression. It's a guessing game. That's why it's mental illness, and it's not a disease. There is no test that you can take. So you're allowing people who are not trained as medical professionals to give your child a medical procedure, counseling all day long, every class. Let's sit in circles and have counseling about grief counseling, trauma-informed circles. Is that it's a pseudoscience that as adults, when you go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it's a one-on-one relationship but it's still a pseudoscience, which is why the relationship is important, because for me, it got to a point after I got clean that therapy was not helping me anymore. I had confronted everything that I needed to work through, and it actually was triggering for me, having to keep talking about the things I didn't need to talk about anymore.
Right.
A good therapist trained it's called an iatrogenic effect. Iatrogenesis is when any kind of medical treatment is given to a human, a doctor, whether it's chemo or anything, or it's an adverse reaction, is that when a medical treatment is no longer working, you have medical professionals to stop it. So they've been doing it for probably 10 or 15 years, is that you've been sent through different pedagogies or different things that the state has adopted. The counseling has been going on long enough that they've been doing it without parents knowing. And what we're seeing is an iatrogenic effect, is that you want somebody who has no accountability for counseling your child's mental health to do it. But there is not that one-on-one actual doctor-patient relationship with somebody who cares about your well-being. And if it's actually making you worse and not better, to say, we need to stop this. Yeah. So that's what next show we'll get into, is where all of that came from. And this will bring people like Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is that the psychology is really where I started to understand, because the same people that create eugenics and, sterilization of mentally ill that led to the Holocaust. Hitler got his ideas from America. Yeah. It is the same. I kept seeing the same exact names in relation to the Holocaust, psychology's role in the Holocaust. I kept seeing the same exact names that I was seeing in the education realm. And then I had to go find, they all got trained at one place, Leipzig University in Germany, by one man. And that's how psychology came to be, is that psychology is in its infancy, yet the entire nation, the country, the world is relying, all we hear is mental health. Is that, what is this obsession? Because ever since we've been talking about mental health, it's actually, that's the thing, is that treatment is supposed to make you better. Even if it's something there is nowhere in history have they ever done a medical procedure to every human, every child. And when it hasn't made things better, they've doubled down or tripled down on it. When it doesn't it's not possible, you stop doing it. And so we're at that place now where it's it's only gotten worse since we started doing it.
And it's more than mental health, as you know. It's also
it is. But I had
medical field. Yeah, they want to
the entire, and that's why I love the people that you and I both know that I work with, is we can have these conversations about how compromised the medical industry, but big. So it's if you're enraged, I tell people, by big pharma and the medical complex, is that you have to understand education, because it's there and it's being done to the tiniest brains that have not even formed yet.
Yeah. Yep. It's child abuse. It's
100%.
Abuse.
No,
all the way around. And the last slide that you showed, and were telling us about, I noticed the date on that, and that is right about when the Age of Enlightenment with John Locke, where everything had to be
is that, so all
experience.
Of this, right?
Yeah.
So the French Revolution, it is imperative that is, so it's when did these ideas of socialism come to be? Like, when did, is it the understanding the French like the Enlightenment and, you know, the French Revolution, is that is absolutely, that is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It's like, so that's really like the time frame, is that if you wanted to backdate it even more, is that really the Enlightenment and the French Revolution is when, and I mean, Rousseau is a huge part of all of the documentation, and a pre Karl Marx, pre all of them. It was it was the Enlightenment.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, there's a lot to review here. Some of you might want to watch this a few times and take notes. Anne, thank you. I know it's a lot of hard work. This has been a total labor of love, and it almost, I realize that you feel like, I'm sure your family feels it's an obsession, but when God gives you a project like this, you really have to be very clear and do your homework the way you have and your deep dive research. Otherwise, people are going to blow it off. And I think you opened the show with the right exact, they're doing what they intended to do. This is a long game.
Because I did the fool's errand for like my first 2 years. I wrote legislation, like our, big in Virginia, if we have any left, like big patriot, like delegate, like 7 delegates, 2 senators 2 years ago carried it. Like, I've written the legislation as a grassroots. Like, I don't get funded. I'm not anybody's mouthpiece. I did everything that I thought I could do. Is that and then I realized is that there's no way that you can write is that there's no way out of this. But I want to close. If anybody wants to read a great book, and I don't recommend books that somebody else has written often. One, it was written in 1981 by Samuel Blumenfeld, and it's called "Is Public Education Necessary?" Which is a question, and he's one of the only people that I can really find that dug back to like the origins of what happened before. And so now he's one of, if I never suggest an author outright to most people. Sam Blumenfeld and Camp Constitution, which is still going on, is that they are amazing resources on all of this stuff, as well as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergs, the Committee of 300. I mean, but Camp Constitution, they're great if you want like organizations that you might not know about that do amazing things. And another one, if you want to know about the therapy stuff I just talked about, and I don't do this often either, is that Bad Therapy. It came out last year. Now I have to read and for me to suggest anything to anybody. And Abigail Schreier, who she's from Hillsdale, and it's an easy read, and it breaks down things like trauma-informed care, restorative justice, social emotional learning. Is that as a behavioral therapist, is that she did a deep dive into the education. She went to the crazy conferences that sometimes we have to make ourselves go and bear witness to see the teachers talk about this stuff, like salivating at how excited they were to do this to kids. And so Bad Therapy is a modern book that came out last year that I am confident to help people understand that aspect. But then Is Public Education Necessary from 1981? I was a year old. Okay. Sam Blumenfeld he really jumped in. It was the first time that question had ever been asked. Like, I've read a lot of reviews and interviews from the end of the 80s with people being like, I had never thought about that before. Wow. So, you don't have to go through hundreds of pages of manuscripts. If whether it's the mental health or the origins, those are 2 books that I would, until I get mine finished, which is going to be like full front to back with the documentation included. It's going to be like an
volumes.
Yeah.
probably a trilogy.
Yeah. Which decade are we looking for? Because
yes.
Original source documents are what you have to have just for people to see. It's like,
So if you'll send me those,
Yeah.
if you don't mind,
Yeah.
and then I can put the links so people can just go and get them, because I know there are a lot of parents out there who are disgusted. They don't want their children coming home with these psychotic ideas that are being put into their heads. And so they are looking for options. They're looking for other ways. And I think this will help, and for grandparents to really get into this, because grandparents don't get a free ride on this.
I'm going to put together a PDF with the book images and then the links where to buy them, because I've been kind of compiling books that I like. There's some from the 70s there's one by John Steinbacher called The Child Seducers from, I think, 1971. That's an amazing read. It explains so much that we don't understand. So I like the old ones because that stuff that the modern ones tend to have a almost like grifting off the woke feel, like I'm just going to blame the left, but not a comprehensive of like how we got here or where it came from. So I'm going to put that together for you, and so you can get that up on your website, and I'll shoot it over to you shortly, because my husband's actually home today, so I'm not in full-fledged home mode.
That's awesome. So thank you so much. Where can people, just real fast, where can people find your work?
So VirginiansForChildrenFirst.org, or abbreviated is VAFCF.org. And then there's our action arm, which is PT6.org, which is Parent Team 6. It's kind of like our action arm of Virginians for Children First. And then you can, but I'm on social media. If anybody, if you trust, you're more than welcome. If you know people that want to talk more, I travel. I'm going to Winchester. I have like 3 big speaking things coming up. That's what I do. If anybody wants, is that I travel to educate people who care enough that want to know more. And so just reach out and put the bat signal out, as I call it. And that's what I was put here to do, is to help. And that's all I want to do.
Thank you so much.
Take care. God bless.
Yeah. So everyone keep an eye out, because this is part 2. I think we're going to have 4 parts. It may end up being more, but we're going to start with 4.
And I'm going to use the slides, and I'm going to send you also like a synopsis of the last show and this show too, so people can have like with the slides. I will get that to you shortly.
Thank you.
Have a great day.